My name is Cordelia Haynes, and I'm sitting across from my boss, Thaddeus Morse, as he slides a piece of paper across his polished desk toward me. It's my annual review, and I've been with this marketing consultancy for 8 years. He's wearing that particular expression he gets when he thinks he's about to deliver devastating news, like a cat who's cornered a mouse. "We're cutting your salary in half," he says, leaning back in his leather chair. "Take it or leave it." The number on that paper is so low it would barely cover my rent. I look up at him, and he's actually smirking. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, of saving his reputation countless times, of being the person every client actually talks to while he takes credit for my work. 8 years, and this is what he thinks I'm worth. "I understand," I say calmly. "When does this take effect?" His smirk widens. Immediately. I nod and fold the paper neatly. "Perfect timing," I tell him, and something flickers across his face because my reaction isn't what he expected. "Before I go deeper into what happened, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story is reaching people around the world. And also like, subscribe, and click the bell icon, because what I'm about to share with you is going to show you exactly how someone can think they hold all the power and discover they never had any at all. See, what Thaddeus didn't know, as he sat there trying to humiliate me, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from Elena Voss. Elena runs the most successful marketing firm in our city, and she'd been watching my work for years. Not Thaddeus's work, mine. Because everyone in this industry knows who actually delivers results, even when someone else's name is on the door. "Cordelia," Elena had said during our coffee meeting, "I want to offer you something different. Not just a job, a partnership. I'm expanding, and I need someone who understands that business is built on relationships, not ego." I hadn't given her an answer that day. I told her I needed time to think. But sitting there watching Thaddeus destroy 8 years of loyalty with a single piece of paper, Elena's offer suddenly felt like the universe aligning perfectly. You have to understand something about Thaddeus Morse. He inherited this company from his father 12 years ago. Never worked a day in client services, never had to charm a difficult customer or stay up all night fixing someone else's mistake. He's one of those men who thinks showing up and having his name on the building automatically makes him indispensable. What he never realized is that for the past 3 years, I've been running his entire operation. Not officially, of course. Officially, I'm a senior account manager. But practically, every major decision flows through me first. Every crisis gets resolved by me before it reaches his radar. Every client relationship exists because I built it, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. Take our biggest account, Pemberton Industries. Their CEO, Janet Pemberton, thinks she has a direct line to the company owner because that's how I set it up. When she calls with an urgent problem, she asks for me by name. When she's happy with our work, she sends thank you notes addressed to me personally. Thaddeus gets copied on emails, sure, but Janet and I are the ones who actually solve problems together. Or consider Morrison Tech, our second largest client. I've been their point person for 4 years. I know the founder's daughter just started college. I remember his wife's chemotherapy schedule. I send congratulations when their quarterly numbers exceed expectations. Thaddeus shows up to the annual dinner and makes small talk, but Morrison calls me when he needs real advice. This pattern repeats across our entire client base, 23 major accounts, and every single relationship runs through me. Not because I'm some master manipulator, but because I actually care about their success. I remember details. I follow up on concerns. I deliver what I promise when I promise it. But here's what really made Thaddeus vulnerable, and what he never saw coming. The suppliers and vendors who keep his business running also work primarily with me. When we need printing done quickly, I call Jameson at Premier Graphics directly. When we need last-minute catering for a client event, Rosa at Artisan Foods knows my voice. When our computers break down, Marcus from TechSure asks for me specifically because he knows I'll explain the problem clearly and treat his technicians with respect. These aren't just business relationships. They're human connections built over years of consistent, respectful interaction. While Thaddeus was playing golf and attending networking events where he'd hand out business cards to people who'd forget him within a week, I was building a foundation of genuine professional relationships based on competence and mutual respect. Even his employees gravitate toward me. When someone's confused about a project, they come to my office. When there's a conflict between departments, they ask if I can mediate. When people are thinking about leaving, they confide in me first. Not because I positioned myself as some alternative authority figure, but because I actually listen and help solve problems instead of just delegating them to someone else. The week after my conversation with Elena, I started paying closer attention to exactly how much of Thaddeus's business depended on me personally. It was staggering. I was copied on probably 90% of important emails. My phone number was the one most clients had saved. My relationships were the ones that generated repeat business and referrals. I realized that Thaddeus had made a classic mistake. He'd built a business where he was the visible figurehead, but I was the actual foundation. Remove me, and everything else would have nothing to stand on. So when he slid that salary cut across his desk with such obvious satisfaction, when he looked at me like I was some disposable employee who should be grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Perfect timing, I'd said, and I meant it. I stood up from his office that day and walked directly to my desk. I opened my computer and typed out a brief, professional email to Elena Voss. I accept your partnership offer. When would you like me to start? Her response came back within 20 minutes. How about Monday? It was Thursday. That afternoon, I submitted my formal resignation to Human Resources. 2 weeks' notice, as required by my contract. Professional, courteous, giving him time to transition my responsibilities to someone else. Of course, what Thaddeus didn't realize was that my responsibilities couldn't actually be transitioned. You can't transfer 8 years of relationship building in a 2-week handover period. When I told him I was leaving, he barely looked up from his computer. Fine, he said. We'll manage without you. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I spent my remaining 2 weeks being the most helpful departing employee in corporate history. I documented every project I was working on. I created detailed client profiles with contact information and history. I wrote comprehensive guides for managing vendor relationships. I organized my files meticulously and left clear instructions for whoever would take over my accounts. What I didn't do was transfer the actual relationships themselves, because you can't transfer trust. You can't document the fact that Janet Pemberton calls me when she's frustrated, because she knows I'll actually listen and find solutions. You can't write a manual explaining that Morrison trusts my judgment because I've never steered him wrong. You can't hand over the respect I've earned from suppliers who know that when I promise something, it happens. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk while Thaddeus was in a meeting. I took my personal items, my diplomas, a few plants I'd brought to brighten up my workspace. I left behind all the company property, all the client files, all the business records. I wasn't stealing anything. I was just no longer available to be the invisible infrastructure holding everything together. I shook hands with my colleagues, hugged a few of the people I'd worked closely with, and walked out at exactly 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Monday morning, I started my new position as Elena's partner at Voss Associates. We'd restructured the partnership so I'd have equity and decision-making authority from day one. My new office had windows that actually opened, a coffee machine that worked, and a partner who valued competence over ego. By Tuesday, my old phone number was disconnected, forwarded to a generic company voicemail. By Wednesday, things at Thaddeus's company started getting interesting. Janet Pemberton called the main office looking for me. The receptionist transferred her to Thaddeus, who had no idea why she was calling or what project she was referring to. Janet hung up confused and called Morrison Tech's CEO to ask if he knew what was going on. Morrison called the office Thursday morning with a question about an upcoming campaign launch. Thaddeus took the call personally, trying to sound knowledgeable, but it became obvious within 5 minutes that he didn't understand the details of his own company's project. Morrison asked to speak with someone who was actually familiar with his account. There wasn't anyone. By Friday of that first week, 3 more major clients had called with questions or concerns and received similarly unhelpful responses. 2 vendors called about late payments that I would normally have processed. The IT support company showed up for a scheduled maintenance visit, that Thaddeus had forgotten was happening. I know all this because people started calling me directly, not to complain about Thaddeus exactly, but to ask if I knew what was happening. Janet Pemberton tracked down my new number through a mutual contact and called to congratulate me on my new position. During that conversation, she mentioned how strange it was that my old company suddenly seemed so disorganized. "It's like they forgot how to do business," she said. "Nobody there seems to know what's going on anymore." I listened sympathetically but didn't offer any explanations. What was I supposed to say? That Thaddeus had spent 8 years taking credit for work he couldn't actually do himself? The second week was when the real problems started. One of their biggest suppliers, the printing company I'd worked with for years, called about an overdue payment. Thaddeus apparently got defensive and rude, suggesting they should be more patient about money. Jameson, the owner, called me that afternoon. "Cordelia, I don't know what's happening over there, but that's not how we're used to being treated. If this is how they want to do business going forward, we might need to reconsider our relationship." I maintained my professional boundaries. "That sounds like a conversation you should have with them directly, Jameson. I'm not involved with their business anymore." But of course, I also mentioned that my new company was looking for a reliable printing partner, and would he be interested in discussing a potential partnership? This is where people sometimes misunderstand what happened next. I didn't sabotage Thaddeus's business. I didn't steal his clients or badmouth his company. I simply started building relationships in my new role the same way I'd always built relationships, by being competent, reliable, and genuinely helpful. When Janet Pemberton mentioned she was frustrated with the lack of communication from her current marketing firm, I listened. When she asked if my new company might be interested in discussing her account, I said we'd be happy to have that conversation. When Morrison Tech's CEO called to congratulate me on my new venture and asked about our capabilities, I was honest about what we could offer. Within 3 weeks of leaving Thaddeus's company, Elena and I had secured meetings with 4 of his former clients. Not because I recruited them away, but because they sought us out after becoming increasingly frustrated with the service they were receiving. The beautiful thing about building genuine relationships is that people remember how you made them feel. When they're getting poor service from one provider, they naturally think about someone who consistently provided good service. It's not corporate espionage or unethical competition. It's just basic human nature. By the end of my first month at Voss Associates, we'd signed 3 new major accounts. All of them happened to be companies I'd worked with previously, companies that had grown frustrated with their current marketing firm's inability to provide the level of service they'd grown accustomed to. The tipping point came when Morrison Tech made the switch. Their CEO called Thaddeus personally to explain that they'd be moving their account to a firm that better understood their needs. Thaddeus apparently became belligerent, accusing Morrison of being influenced by a former employee. Morrison called me that afternoon laughing. "Cordelia, that man just proved exactly why we made the right decision. He spent 10 minutes yelling at me about employee loyalty and competitive ethics, but he couldn't answer a single question about our actual business needs. It's like he never understood what we do or why we hired his company in the first place." That's when I realized what was really happening. Thaddeus hadn't just lost me as an employee. He'd lost the person who translated between his ego and the actual requirements of running a business. Without me there to bridge that gap, clients were getting unfiltered exposure to his incompetence. The stories started reaching me through industry contacts, how Thaddeus had forgotten about a major presentation and tried to wing it with outdated information. How he'd promised deliverables that his remaining staff couldn't possibly complete because they didn't have the client relationships necessary to gather requirements. How he'd mishandled a crisis situation that I would have resolved with a few phone calls. Each failure made my former clients more appreciative of the service they were now receiving from Elena and me. Each conversation with Thaddeus reminded them why they'd actually valued working with his company when I was there to make everything run smoothly. 6 weeks after I left, I ran into one of my former colleagues at a coffee shop. She looked exhausted. "Cordelia, it's chaos over there," she said. "Thaddeus keeps asking us to handle things you used to do, but none of us know how. Half the vendors won't return our calls. Clients are constantly asking where you went. And Thaddeus just keeps saying, we need to figure it out because business has to continue." I felt genuinely sorry for her and the other employees who were dealing with the fallout of Thaddeus's mismanagement. They were good people caught in an impossible situation. "Are you looking for other opportunities?" I asked. "Everyone is," she said. "But Thaddeus has started making threats about non-compete clauses and legal action if anyone else leaves." That's when I knew he was truly panicking. Empty legal threats are what incompetent managers resort to when they realize they've lost control of a situation they never actually understood. Elena and I started getting calls from talented people at his company. Not because I was recruiting them, but because word had spread about our growing success and positive work environment. When people are trapped in a failing situation, they naturally gravitate toward opportunities that look more stable and rewarding. We hired 3 of Thaddeus's former employees over the next month. All of them had given proper notice. All of them had been released from any legitimate contractual obligations, and all of them were eager to work somewhere their skills would be valued rather than taken for granted. With each new hire, we gained deeper institutional knowledge about accounts that were struggling at the old company. Not proprietary information or trade secrets, but general industry knowledge and professional expertise that these individuals had developed over years of experience. The final domino fell when Pemberton Industries made their decision to switch firms. Janet called me personally to explain their reasoning. "Cordelia, we've been trying to make it work with your old company for 2 months now, but it's like working with strangers. Nobody there understands our business or our history. Every conversation starts from zero. We're paying premium rates for amateur service." When Elena and I signed the Pemberton account, we became the fastest-growing marketing firm in the city. In 3 months, we'd gone from a small boutique operation to a major player in the local market. All because Thaddeus Morse thought cutting my salary in half would teach me my place. The last time I saw him was at an industry networking event about 4 months after I'd left his company. He looked terrible. Stressed, tired, defensive. When he saw me across the room, he actually tried to approach me. "Cordelia," he said, "we need to talk." I was polite but firm. "I don't think there's anything for us to discuss, Thaddeus." "You destroyed my business," he said, loud enough that people nearby started paying attention. I looked at him calmly. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped fixing everything." That was the moment he finally understood what had really happened. I could see it in his face. For 8 years, he'd been running a company where his most important function was staying out of my way while I made everything work. When he drove me away, he lost the only person who'd been preventing his incompetence from becoming visible to his clients. He didn't lose his business because I sabotaged it. He lost it because he'd never actually been running it. The room around us had gone quiet. Other professionals in our industry were listening to a conversation that perfectly illustrated why some businesses succeed and others fail. It had nothing to do with revenge or corporate warfare. It had everything to do with understanding that sustainable success comes from genuine competence and authentic relationships, not from titles and ego and the illusion of power. I excused myself politely and rejoined Elena's conversation with a potential new client. 6 months later, I heard through industry contacts that Thaddeus had been forced to sell what remained of his company to a larger firm. The brand name disappeared entirely. His father's legacy, built over decades, was gone. But here's the thing that people don't always understand about this story. I never set out to destroy Thaddeus Morse or his business. I never planned some elaborate revenge scheme. I simply refused to continue propping up someone who treated me as disposable while depending entirely on my work to maintain his reputation. The most devastating revenge isn't what you do to someone. It's what happens when you stop doing everything for them. Today, 2 years later, Elena and I run the most successful marketing consultancy in 3 states. We have 47 employees, offices in 2 cities, and a client waiting list that stretches 6 months out. Forbes featured us in an article about women-owned businesses that are reshaping their industries. The local business journal named me Entrepreneur of the Year. But that's not the twist I want to tell you about. The twist is what happened to Thaddeus after his company collapsed, and how it led to the most unexpected phone call I've ever received. Remember how I mentioned he was forced to sell what remained of his business? Well, what I didn't know at the time was who bought it. Turns out it was acquired by Meridian Holdings, one of those massive corporate investment firms that purchases struggling companies, strips them for assets, and either flips them or dissolves them entirely. Thaddeus walked away with enough money to cover his debts and maybe 6 months of living expenses. Not exactly the comfortable retirement he'd probably imagined when he inherited his father's company. For about a year after that, I didn't hear anything about him. Occasionally, someone would mention seeing him at networking events, trying to rebuild his reputation, but nobody took him seriously anymore. Word travels fast in our industry, and everyone knew what had really happened to his business. Then, about 8 months ago, something interesting started happening. I began getting calls from headhunters, asking if I knew anything about Thaddeus Morse's background and work history. Apparently, he was applying for senior management positions at various companies, and his resume made it sound like he'd been some kind of visionary leader who'd built a successful agency before deciding to pursue new challenges. I was always honest when those recruiters called. I explained that while Thaddeus had owned a company, he hadn't been particularly involved in the day-to-day operations or client relationships. I never badmouthed him personally, but I didn't help him create a false narrative about his professional capabilities either. Most of those conversations ended with the recruiter thanking me for my insights and moving on to other candidates. But then, 3 months ago, I got a call that completely shocked me. "Ms. Haynes? This is Patricia Williams from Blackstone Associates. We're an executive search firm, and we're hoping you might be able to help us with a rather unusual situation." Blackstone Associates is one of the most prestigious headhunting firms in the country. They place CEOs and senior executives at Fortune 500 companies. I couldn't imagine why they were calling me. "We've been retained by a client to find a chief marketing officer for their organization," Patricia continued. "It's a significant role with substantial responsibility and compensation. Based on our research, we believe you might be perfect for this position." I was flattered but confused. I appreciate the call, but I'm very happy with my current situation. I'm a partner in my own firm. "We understand that, and we certainly respect your success, but this opportunity is quite extraordinary. Our client is specifically looking for someone with your combination of relationship-building skills and operational expertise. The compensation package starts at $400,000 annually, plus equity and bonuses." That got my attention. Not because I was interested in leaving Elena and our company, but because that kind of offer meant they were serious about finding someone exceptional. "Can you tell me more about the client?" I asked. "Actually, that's where this becomes somewhat sensitive. The position is with Meridian Holdings, specifically to oversee the marketing operations for their recently acquired properties. They're looking for someone who can rebuild client relationships and restore operational efficiency to companies that have experienced management challenges." I almost dropped the phone. Meridian Holdings, the company that had bought Thaddeus's business. "I'm not sure I'd be interested in that particular opportunity," I said carefully. "Ms. Haynes, I hope you'll at least consider meeting with our client. They're prepared to offer significant autonomy and resources. And frankly, they specifically requested you by name after researching your background and reputation in the industry." That evening, I talked it over with Elena. The whole situation felt surreal. "They want you to clean up corporate acquisitions that failed due to poor management," Elena said. "That's actually a fascinating role. You'd essentially be doing what you did for Thaddeus, but for multiple companies and with proper recognition and compensation. But working for the company that bought his business? Doesn't that seem weird? Cordelia, you didn't cause his business to fail. You just stopped preventing it from failing. If Meridian Holdings has figured out that they need someone with your skills to fix similar situations, that's actually a compliment to your expertise." I agreed to take the meeting, mostly out of curiosity. The Meridian Holdings office was in a downtown high-rise, with views of the entire city. Patricia Williams met me in the lobby and escorted me to the 42nd floor, where I was introduced to David Chen, the regional director overseeing their recent acquisitions. David was nothing like what I'd expected. Mid-40s, soft-spoken, incredibly well-informed about business operations. He'd clearly done his homework about my background and the situation with Thaddeus's company. "Cordelia, thank you for taking this meeting. I want to be completely transparent about why we're interested in you specifically." He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the conference table between us. Over the past 18 months, Meridian has acquired 7 small to medium-sized companies in various industries. All of them were failing when we purchased them, and all of them had similar patterns of dysfunction. Talented employees being undervalued by ego-driven management. Strong client relationships being neglected or mismanaged. Operational expertise being overlooked in favor of surface-level leadership. He opened the folder and showed me detailed analyses of each acquisition. In every case, we discovered that the company's actual value existed in the relationships and expertise of mid-level employees who weren't being properly utilized or compensated. When we tried to rebuild these companies using traditional management approaches, we struggled to restore the client relationships and operational efficiency that had made them valuable in the first place. I could see where this was going. You want me to help you identify and retain the people who actually made those companies work. Exactly. But more than that, we want you to develop a systematic approach for rebuilding companies that have lost their operational foundation due to poor leadership. We think you understand something about business relationships that most executives miss. David leaned forward in his chair. We've studied what happened with your former employer's business, not to judge or assign blame, but to understand the dynamics that led to such a complete operational collapse. What we found was fascinating. He pulled out another document. This one focused specifically on Thaddeus's company. Before you left, that business had consistent revenue growth, high client retention, and strong supplier relationships. Within 6 months of your departure, all of those metrics declined dramatically. But here's what caught our attention. The clients who moved to your new firm reported higher satisfaction and better results than they'd ever experienced. I wasn't sure where he was going with this. That suggests to us that you weren't just maintaining existing relationships. You were actually providing a level of service that exceeded what those clients had received before, even when you were constrained by working within someone else's company structure. What does that have to do with Meridian Holdings? David smiled. We want to give you the resources and authority to do for our acquired companies what you did for your own firm. Identify the real talent, rebuild the authentic relationships, and create sustainable operations based on competence rather than hierarchy. The offer was even more substantial than Patricia had indicated. $400,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses that could double that amount, plus equity stakes in the companies I successfully rebuilt. I would have a team of analysts and operational specialists. I would report directly to David with complete autonomy over hiring, firing, and strategic decisions for the marketing operations of all acquired properties. But the most interesting part of the offer was what David said next. There's one more thing, Cordelia. We have a particular situation that we think might interest you personally. He pulled out a final document. 3 weeks ago, we acquired another struggling marketing firm. The owner had been trying to rebuild his reputation after his previous company failed, but he'd made similar management mistakes. Talented employees leaving, client relationships deteriorating, operational dysfunction. My heart started beating faster. The owner's name is Thaddeus Morse. I stared at David in complete shock. You bought Thaddeus's new company? Actually, he never owned it. He was hired as the general manager for a group of investors who thought his experience running a previous agency would be valuable. When that arrangement failed, the investors reached out to us about acquiring the assets and rebuilding the operation. David opened the document to show me financial reports and operational assessments. The company has good bones, solid client base, talented staff, decent infrastructure, but it's suffering from the same leadership problems that destroyed his previous business. The staff doesn't trust management, clients are frustrated with inconsistent service, and nobody seems to understand how to coordinate the various moving parts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to take over the company where Thaddeus works? We want you to rebuild it properly. What happens to Mr. Morse would be entirely your decision as the operational director. You'd have complete authority over staffing and management structure. The irony was so perfect it almost felt fictional. Here was the universe offering me the chance to become Thaddeus's boss, to have complete control over his professional future, to decide whether he stayed or went. It was the ultimate revenge fantasy, handed to me on a silver platter. And that's when I realized something important about myself. I didn't want it. Not because I wasn't angry about how he'd treated me. Not because I thought he deserved some kind of professional redemption. But because taking that role would mean spending my time and energy fixing problems created by someone else's incompetence, instead of continuing to build something positive with Elena. David, I'm incredibly flattered by this offer. The compensation is generous, the role is challenging, and I can see how it would be professionally rewarding. I paused to gather my thoughts. But I've spent 8 years of my career propping up someone else's ego and cleaning up messes I didn't create. I'm not interested in doing that again, even with better pay and recognition. David looked disappointed, but not surprised. I understand completely. We had to make the offer, because you're exactly the kind of leader we need. But we respect your decision to focus on your own company's growth. As I was leaving the building, Patricia walked me to the elevator. Can I ask you something off the record? She said. Sure. When David told you about the Thaddeus Morse situation, I saw your expression change. Was there some personal history there that made the offer less appealing? I thought about that question as the elevator descended 42 floors. Actually, it was the opposite, I told her. The personal history made me realize that the best revenge isn't getting power over someone who wronged you. It's building something so successful that their opinion of you becomes completely irrelevant. 6 months later, Elena and I opened our third office. We now employ 63 people, including 12 former employees of various companies that Meridian Holdings has acquired and rebuilt. Our client base includes Fortune 500 companies, and we've been approached by 3 different investment firms about expansion opportunities. Last month, I got an invitation to speak at the National Marketing Association's annual conference about sustainable business growth and authentic leadership. The keynote address, to an audience of 1,500 industry professionals. Thaddeus will probably be in that audience. He still attends industry events, still tries to network his way into new opportunities. If he is there, he'll watch me receive recognition for the expertise he never bothered to acknowledge when he had the chance. But here's what I've learned about real success. It's not about proving anything to people who undervalued you. It's about building something so substantial and meaningful that their recognition becomes unnecessary. The best revenge isn't destroying someone who wronged you. It's becoming so successful that you forget they exist. And when you do remember them, you realize that their ability to hurt you disappeared the moment you stopped needing their approval. That salary cut Thaddeus gave me 2 years ago was supposed to teach me my place. Instead, it taught me my worth. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me about a time when someone underestimated you and how that experience changed your perspective on your own capabilities. And if you're currently in a situation where you feel undervalued or taken for granted, remember that the most powerful thing you can do is stop making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurity. Your worth isn't determined by how other people treat you. It's determined by what you choose to build when you finally decide you deserve better.